Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of today's top stories. Why are you paying extra at the pump? That's the question lawmakers say they're trying to get to the bottom of this week. Oil and gas CEOs are coming to Capitol Hill to testify. We'll have a look at how the two parties plan to question them. 3 states are suing the Biden administration. That's over its lifting of a rule that blocks illegal aliens from entering the United States. We talked to an Arizona representative about how this might affect the current border situation in the midterm elections. Oklahoma Congressman and candidate for United States Senate Markwayne Mullin visited the southern border recently, and he'll share with us what he saw and the impact if Title 42 is not kept in place. As you continue to pay more at the gas pump, you may be asking why. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill will drill oil and gas companies this week to try to find answers. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more details. Melina, this gas price issue is bearing down on Americans across the country each day. What can you tell us about this hearing there on the Hill that's meant to address this ever-pressing issue?
The pain at the pump is an issue that both parties do acknowledge and say that they're eager to solve, but what's causing these price hikes anyways? Here on Capitol Hill, the answer to that question largely depends on who you ask. As we've heard from President Biden and Democrats over the past couple of weeks, they've referred to it as Putin's price hike, and they're also pinning some of that blame on oil and gas producers. Here's Senate Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor today explaining why Democrats are accusing these oil and gas companies of price gouging.
Oil companies make more profit. And what do they use it for? Stock buybacks, which do nothing to improve the economy, improve workers, or help the consumer.
And tomorrow, Democrats on the House side are planning to bring in oil and gas executives from companies like Chevron, Shell, Exxon, just to name a few, so they can drill them on this. The Democrat caucus chairman said that they're planning to send the message to the American people that they're on the case to tackle these high prices. They also plan to push these gas executives to take the initiative to lower the costs themselves.
I think it's important for American corporations, as we've seen others do, to show some patriotism that consumers and everyday Americans experience in the form of lower gas prices.
But it's no surprise that Republicans have a very different line of questioning prepared tomorrow. I asked the Republican whip, Steve Scalise, how they're planning to question these oil executives and the messaging that they're planning on pushing tomorrow. Here's his response.
But we're going to also be asking some of the myths that are out there, like the 9,000 permits that President Biden wants to talk about. Oil companies aren't sitting on those leases. In many cases, what we hear from them is that they can't produce the leases that they have because every federal regulatory agency is blocking their ability to actually go drill in America.
Republicans also told me they're concerned about some of the regulations that the administration is putting on these oil producers, such as, for example, requiring these oil producers to report their carbon footprint to agencies and banks. They say they're concerned that by requiring to report these carbon footprints, the administration's planning on attaching penalties and penalizing those oil producers based on that reporting. So these are some of the questions that we do expect to see at that hearing tomorrow, and we'll follow it, and hopefully it will shed some light on why we're seeing these higher gas prices and what lawmakers plan to do about it. Steve, back to you.
Melina Wisecup reporting. 3 states are suing the Biden administration over its ending of Title 42. What are some officials warning, and what are we expecting at the southern border as a result of the rule's repeal? NTD's Iris Tao has more.
And now it's about to get a whole lot worse, a whole lot worse.
That's what Representative Andy Biggs is saying today about the upcoming influx of migrants at the southern border. The former Customs and Border Protection Commissioner is warning of the same.
A total, catastrophic, unmitigated crisis where we've handed over operational control of our borders to the cartels.
The backlash follows an announcement that the Biden administration will end Title 42, a pandemic-era restriction that has blocked many migrants from entering the U.S. And 3 Republican states, Arizona, Missouri, and Louisiana, are suing the Biden administration for ending Title 42, arguing that it was done unlawfully and will have a devastating impact on states.
Given the Biden administration's catch and release policies, this surge will lead to an ever-increasing number of aliens being released into American communities.
Some rights groups have called for an end to Title 42, calling its expulsions inhumane. But the former ICE director today defended it, saying,
Well, illegal immigration is down 83%. How many women didn't get raped? How many children didn't drown? How many Americans didn't die of overdose deaths?
I think there should be consistency.
Meanwhile, several Democratic senators are also calling to oppose the end of Title 42. Biggs says more are recognizing how an insecure border will sway the upcoming midterm elections.
As Democrats look at it and they say they've got a real electoral challenge coming up in November, and they know that Americans, particularly in my state of Arizona, this is a top 1 or 2 issue.
Reporting Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
The U.S. has already seen a record number of illegals coming through the southern border in recent months. But with Title 42, a measure that blocks many from entering, set to be rescinded, this will usher in hundreds of thousands more per month. Congressman Markwayne Mullin is running for U.S. Senate in Oklahoma, and we had a chance to sit down with him earlier. Congressman Markwayne Mullin, thank you so much for joining us again on the Capitol Report.
Absolutely, Steve. Thanks for having me again.
Congressman, Title 42 is set to be rescinded in just a couple of weeks from now. How is Title 42 able to curb the flow of illegals?
Well, it basically looks from the health perspective. President Trump put this in place to combat COVID, and it specifically targets males traveling by themselves. So we use the word single males, but it's not that they're single, but they're traveling by themselves. And once they're apprehended, if there's no reason for them to be there for truly claiming asylum, then we have underneath Title 42, underneath health restrictions, because we're still battling COVID. You got to remember, the Democrats just asked for another $15 billion in COVID relief. Since we're still battling COVID, we were able to deport the individual traveling by himself. And this has been the only tool left for us to actually, from the Trump era, to actually deport individuals. You got to remember, deportation right now is at a 26-year low. So basically, the only tool we still have to deport individuals, these are males traveling by themselves, is underneath Title 42. That's why the chief of the Border Patrol had said that if we rescind this, they expect an influx of an additional 500,000 crossings. Now keep in mind, Steve, he's also said that he expects by June for us to hit the 1 million mark with Title 42 in place. So we're talking about a 50% increase in illegal crossings if Title 42 is rescinded.
Now, Congressman, you mentioned that Title 42 was tied into the pandemic measures and whatnot. You said that there's requests for billions of dollars in pandemic relief.
$15 billion.
$15 billion. We're also seeing that there's a federal mandate still for wearing masks. Yes. So I'm just trying to understand how, it would apply in one direction but not in the other.
Steve, if you can figure that one out, let me know. I'm just going to tell you this administration hasn't made sense since they've started. I mean, we're in a disastrous situation to begin with. But for them to say that they're willing to end Title 42 because there's not a COVID crisis anymore, at the same time saying there is a COVID crisis and we need another $15 billion to combat it. And oh, by the way, you still got to wear a mask if you're on mass transit. There's nothing about that says that the decisions they're making are anything but one thing. They want an open border. They want amnesty complete because they want the border completely open. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine in 2014 who was a Democrat, and I'll leave his name out of it. But Nancy Pelosi came over to us while we were sitting there talking, and she says, "What is this? It's either amnesty or nothing." And she turned around and walked away. That was in 2014, Steve. That mindset hasn't left. It's still a double down process to what they want. Now, why they want an open border? I honestly, for the life of me, don't understand, because it's a national security risk. Now, Pelosi gets the same briefings that I get, because the briefings I get on the House Intelligence Committee are a lot of times found in the president's briefings. The Speaker of the House and the leader of the minority party both gets the same briefings. She knows what type of national security risk this is, and so does the President of the United States, but yet they're ignoring it.
I'm just going to switch gears a little bit here. Tomorrow, there's oil executives expected to testify on the Hill tomorrow. The Democrats are set to start probing them on price gouging, using the Ukraine crisis to their advantage to make more money. I just want to get your opinion. Is that the reason that we're seeing record high gas prices at the pump?
You know, this just goes to the philosophy of our Democrats right now. You know, if you're on the Hill right now, you'll see a large sum of Democrats that are wearing a button that says Socialist Democrats. Socialism is absolutely key to what they're doing here. And what I mean by that is the government distracts people by saying, hey, we put these policies in place, but don't pay attention to us. It's really not us. It's these greedy executives. See, this is why the government needs to be in control of everything, because if we're in control of it, we can control this. We wouldn't ever gouge the people. But that's what socialism is. They won't dare talk about it's the policies that the Biden put in place from day one, from January 20th, from day one, that put our dependency more on foreign oil rather than marching towards the policies that Trump had, which was putting us in the path to energy independence. So all they're doing is just distracting the American people by trying to blame somebody else, when the whole time they know that it's the large government, which is socialism. It's the overtaking of private industry, which is what socialism is, that's failing here. I mean, you got everything they have touched. The border is failing. Our international interest is failing. Our energy independence doesn't even exist. We're not even trying to get there anymore. So we become more dependent on foreign oil, especially Russia. So it has nothing to do with the amount that we've increased 40% of our imports from Russia just since Biden's been in office. That has anything to do with pricing. It doesn't have anything to do with the fact that they're canceling pipelines for us to be able to transport stuff to the market. It doesn't have anything to do with that they've limited the flow rate in almost all of our pipelines across the United States, which congest our distribution system for our products. It doesn't have anything to do with that, with the policies they put in place that's causing the pricing to go up. It has everything to do with what they've done, but they want to blame the executives.
Candidate for United States Senate in Oklahoma, Congressman Markwayne Mullin, thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will be undergoing a sweeping one-month review. CDC head Rochelle Walensky announces that the agency is making an effort to modernize how public health programs are delivered to the American people. The agency has been under mounting public scrutiny over how it has responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. In a statement on Monday, the CDC said that throughout the pandemic, the agency has worked to speed up data reporting and scientific processes. It now wants to formally adopt the changes it has made and what it has learned throughout the pandemic. The agency says it will also develop new ways to adapt to the changing environment. Congressman Fred Upton of Michigan announces that he will retire from office. Upton is one of the longest-serving Republicans in the House, and he is also one of the 10 Republicans that voted to impeach former President Trump after the January 6th Capitol breach.
Even the best stories has a last chapter. This is it for me. I've done the zillions of airline miles back and forth. I've signed Fred to over 1 million letters, cast more votes than anyone in this chamber while here, and by most accounts have succeeded in making a difference, accomplishing what I've set out to do with more unfinished work still yet to come.
Upton has represented Western Michigan since 1987. Including Upton, 16 Republicans and 31 Democrats in the House have said that they're not running for re-election in the 2022 midterms. At today's UN meeting, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelenskyy makes a plea for justice. He's accusing Russia of war crimes. Defense Secretary Lloyd and Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley share strategies on defending Europe as they testified before the House Armed Services Committee earlier today. The Ukraine war wages on, and the United States is slated to impose more sanctions on Russia tomorrow. We spoke to former Trump National Security Advisor, retired General Michael Flynn, to get his assessment of the Ukraine-Russia war, and we asked him if the war could have been avoided. His response coming up. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. I'm Steve Lance. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy accused Russia of war crimes at today's UN Security Council meeting. He's calling for justice and a tribunal.
Anyone who has given criminal orders and carried them out by killing our people will be brought before the tribunal.
This comes after video footage of alleged civilian deaths in Bucha sparked international condemnation. Ukraine says they've found over 400 bodies. A number of world leaders are voicing support for Zelenskyy, including President Biden and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
I will never forget the horrifying images of civilians killed in Bucha, and I immediately called for an independent investigation to guarantee effective accountability.
Russia denies Ukraine's allegations, saying that pictures are, quote, just another provocation of Kyiv. The Pentagon called the images deeply troubling, but says it cannot confirm the claims. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Tuesday that Russian atrocities committed in Bucha were not random acts of a rogue unit.
It's a deliberate campaign to kill, to torture, to rape, to commit atrocities.
He told reporters at Joint Base Andrews that the U.S. and others were in the process of collecting evidence to ensure accountability.
We're working, as are others, to put the evidence together to support the efforts of the Ukrainian Prosecutor General, to support the efforts of the UN Human Rights Council's Commission of Inquiry that we helped establish.
He then headed off to Brussels for a meeting with NATO as well as a meeting with G7 foreign ministers. And according to a senior administration official, the U.S. will announce new sanctions against Russia tomorrow, in coordination with the EU and Group of 7 nations. That will include an investment freeze. And Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and Joint Chiefs of Staff Mark Milley highlighted a strategy to increase American troops in Europe during the Defense Department's budget hearing.
My advice would be to create permanent bases, but don't permanently station. So you get the effect of permanence by rotational forces cycling through permanent bases. And what you don't have to do is incur the cost of family moves, PXs, schools, housing, and that sort of thing.
He told the House Armed Services Committee that several allies, including Poland and Romania, were supportive, as this would help defend against Russia. They also discussed the importance of training our allies, as well as the case in Ukraine.
Well, we've learned that armed with the right capabilities, a determined force can do tremendous work in terms of defending itself, and the Ukrainians demonstrate that each and every day.
The budget hearing lasted several hours, covering multiple defense issues. In his opening statement, Secretary Lloyd Austin named China as America's biggest defense challenge. And Commander Charles Richard of the United States Strategic Command today testified before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. He warned that the U.S. should carefully consider China's actions rather than their rhetoric. He said their breathtaking expansion of land, sea, and air-based nuclear delivery platforms and supporting infrastructure is not consistent with a minimum deterrent posture. Tomorrow, the U.S. is expected to announce yet another round of sanctions on Russia. This comes amid President Biden's calls to try Russian President Vladimir Putin for war crimes. Over the weekend, we had a chance to ask former National Security Advisor under former President Trump, retired General Michael Flynn, about his overall assessment of the Russia-Ukraine war. Here's part of what he had to say. General Michael Flynn, thank you so much for joining us in the Capital Report.
Steve, thank you.
General, I want to get your thoughts on the Ukraine-Russia war. Big picture, what's your take?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to thank Epoch Times for all that you guys do. I mean, your whole organization, the enterprise that you represent is really extraordinary. Your reporting, your honesty, your authenticity is terrific. So I want to get that on the table for listeners and anybody that needs to know where to find the truth. So, okay, Russia, Ukraine, Europe, what's happening? And at the 60,000 foot level, this was a totally avoidable war. So totally avoidable. This goes back to, I really believe, it goes back a long way, but it really goes back to 1994, what was called the Budapest Accords in Budapest, Hungary, between at the end of the Cold War, right? At the time, it was Gorbachev was the head of the Soviet Union, and the basically the collapse of the Soviet Union. In France, you had Mitterrand. In the United Kingdom, you had Margaret Thatcher, and in the United States, you had Bush, George Bush, the father, right? So they had a meeting, and at that meeting, the essential one of the big ticket items that came out of the Budapest Accords was no further encroachment of NATO against this new Russian Federation, and also that meeting was the decision to unify Germany, both West Germany and East Germany. So some big strategic issues in play, one of which was no more encroachment of NATO up to the Russian Federation frontier and borders. And the reason why is because of the threat. We still had the threat of nuclear weapons and a nuclear exchange. And with whoever was going to be future leaders of any of those nations, we didn't want to get into a potential place where we had nuclear missiles literally right across the boundary of two major nation state, or in the case of a NATO or Europe, in the case between Russia and really the European frontier. We didn't want to have nuclear weapons that close to each other. Makes a lot of sense. Now, Steve, we're in a place where it began. Okay? So now is where mistakes will be made, and mistakes are being made, and people's lives are at risk, and many people have already lost their lives. Because once war begins, the inertia of war creates all kinds of second, third, fourth order effects, because when you start to shoot things in the night, right, and you have all these things that are happening, people make mistakes, right? That's the tragedy of war. The one thing, and we're here in one of our rallies here in Oregon. One of the things I said to the audience this morning is, war is a failure of policy and diplomacy. Okay, war is not something that anybody wants. War is not an opportunity. Okay, as I think Biden stated maybe a week or so ago, it's not an opportunity. War is a failure. It's a failure. Anytime you see states, nation states at war with each other, it's because there's a failure to communicate some way, somehow. And that's what happened.
And I want to get your perspective. You have a unique perspective, both from an intelligence community perspective and being a general. When you heard President Biden's comments about potentially taking out Putin, what effect does that have? What is your understanding of those things?
They know because, and everybody in the world knows, because immediately after he said it, they had to start walking it back. They had to start walking it back, right? Everybody in his circle had to start walking it back because it's so wrong to say that. We're not talking about some fourth world nation here, third world nation. We're talking about a great nation state that has, many nuclear weapons, that has a large, relatively large economy, not a great economy, but a large economy, has a large population. It encompasses 8 time zones. It has been in historically, culturally. From a demographic standpoint. All these sort of big issues. It has been part of the world fabric for years, right? For centuries. So you just can't suddenly go, you're bad and regime change. We need regime change. We need to get rid of Putin. You can't say stuff like that. A president of the United, I can sit here and say something stupid like that as just somebody, from the former military, outside the military. Now I could say something like that, and people go, I didn't know what he's talking about. When the president of the United States makes comments like that, that means a lot.
General Michael Flynn, thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Anytime. I appreciate what Epoch Times is doing. God bless you.
The war in Ukraine is entering its 2nd month, and the U.S. is supporting Ukraine by sending more drones and other equipment. This latest installment of supplies comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy asked for help during an interview with CBS over the weekend. Ukrainian officials have also complained that the drones previously sent were insufficient models, and that air defense is the deciding factor for winning this war. Last month, the Biden administration promised a total of $800 million in military aid. The latest equipment is part of it. That's all we have for you this evening on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you back tomorrow.